Urban informality expanded throughout various third world countries during and after the colonization process as a result of rapid population growth and slow urban expansion, creating irregular housing to accommodate the population that couldn't afford to do so. According to Anaya Roy, the formation of these settlements is a further consequence of the incapacity of the government to satisfy the needs of the impoverished masses. During its colonialization, Lagos was stripped of its oil resources and left neglected after the capital moved to Abuja. The city was governed as a crown colony for several years, therefore it has always had unequal living standards between the colonial elites and the African majority that suffered with the housing shortages. In the 1960s, Lagos was the bustling capital of Nigeria with a population of just under 1 million people. Fast growth in conjunction with minimum social investment led to overcrowding and exorbitant rents, which was further worsened by a gradual deterioration in rail, tram, and ferry services. By 1980, Lagos's urban informal environments increased exponentially due to the combination of oil wealth and entrenched elite rule, tram, and ferry, which led to a hollowing out of the Nigerian economy. With extreme polarization, hyperinflation, currency collapse, and rising poverty and unemployment, as industrial and agricultural exports were devastated by the overvalued naira. All of this has led to informal regions within Lagos that we see today. This way, due to poor urban planning and management, the city has faced several crises in regards to lack of resources, space per capita, and high crime rates, bring forth how the lack of the government's involvement in disadvantaged Lagos communities develops a cycle of urban informality. With a population of 15,388,000, Lagos, Nigeria is the second most populous city in Africa. As of the last several years, the city's annual population growth rate is steadily increasing and is currently at 3.5%, which proves to be a problem to the city's small area of 452 square miles. From 2021 to 2022, Lagos saw an increase of 526,000 people. According to Ademola Brimo, Lagos acts as Nigeria's center of commerce, consisting of 70% of Nigeria's industrial and commercial establishments. As a result, it has become a hub of intense migration and settlement. This stems from individuals migrating from Lagos to other parts of Nigeria in search for more opportunities and hope for a better life. As stated by Ayomide Akanola, for many, there's a mindset that moving from rural to urban regions leads to employment opportunities and higher wages. However, with tens of thousands of immigrants, spots for employment are extremely competitive. Lagos's urban organization is based on the immediate need of the citizens, rather than establishing an effective city layout. The larger problem of unsustainable city expansion gives rise to several smaller problems, such as inadequate housing, which leads to the creation of slums, and low employment, which directly affects the widespread poverty of the city.
Sanitation and healthcare problems in Nigeria is a main root cause of problems, mainly the open defecation of the local public. According to statistics, 23.5% of the population defecate in the open area, thus polluting water sources. More than 70,000 children under the age of 5 die each year. 73% of them die from diarrhea and intestinal diseases, and only 26.5% of the population has access to clean water. These phenomena revealed even more problems in the country, such as the shortage of funds, poor health conditions, which has resulted in a loss of more than $3 billion per year, and domestic expenses of extremist groups, meaning the government does not have adequate funds to build basic medical institutions, the sewage purification facilities, and public toilets. The shortage of funds is directly caused by the shortage of workers, many of whom die prematurely because of their weakened immune systems and lack of sufficient medical infrastructure in the area. It has become a vicious cycle in the country and still remains as one of the biggest problems in Nigeria today. Unfortunately, the laws, codes, rules, and institutions created for sanitary segregation and the sparse populations envisioned in colonial cities were passed down to post-colonial administrations. Since then, these regulations have been rapidly outrun by the fast urbanization and post-colonial upheaval. With the 1970 oil boom, an increase in employment in growing urban areas forced the Nigerian government to undertake extensive planning and public service innovations. The informal sector in Nigeria was severely impacted by the economic downturn in the 1980s. The government reacted by vigorously prosecuting any parties involved in the informal economy. Unorderly and unhealthy urban settings increased as a result of the lack of government supervision. In 1980, the government planned to create housing units for those who lacked resources. Only 24% of nearly 200,000 planned housing units were actually realized in full. The remaining funds were relocated to build military barracks and other projects. Additionally, housing programs prioritized substandard homes for middle-class families rather than improving the conditions of the poor. Due to the lack of resources, high crime rates are inevitable. Many of the problems faced in these informal settlements are due to the sluggishness of the government to provide inadequate resources to the poor. On the contrary, urban informality can be considered a positive in regards to community bonding. Luzonians over the years have learned how to accommodate their lifestyles in a poorly managed area. Due to the urban informality setting, Lagos, Nigeria has developed a new way of life, which increases the rich in community involvement and self-sustenance. Independent efforts contribute to the functionality of the city when it comes to scarce resources, limited housing, and health sanitation. In Jane Jacobs' book, The Death and Life of Great American Cities, she explored the idea of mixed-use urban development in her studies. She advocated for bottom-up development, which means that the system starts with the common people. Jacobs wanted to expand a vital urban life, and to do so, she believed that citizens need to piece together their system, starting from the necessities of everyday life, and emerge to challenge the more complex system. Luzonians have also started to participate in such actions. According to Jacobs' ideal, Luzonians can determine their own future if they continue to raise this self-sustaining community.
When finding a solution to urban informality, observing other locations which have dealt with the same issue is natural. Take the Haussmannization of Paris as an example, where the previously narrow road city and slums were deemed inaccessible by federal troops, impeding their work. If this perspective is shifted to Lagos, similarities become apparent, not as much in the context of civil war, but related to the lack of access to public services. The inaccessibility to such resources impedes the population from improving their quality of life. In the context of modern society, performing slum clearances similar to what was done in Paris would seem unfit or inhumane to population. Nowadays referred to as a crime of the state, it is simply a form of top-down planning that is no longer viable given the rights of the people and the focus society has on the individual. Yet, slum upgrading is a possible alternative to resolve irregular urban development. Schofield suggests that it is possible to perform slow urban redevelopment in order to upgrade such properties from non-normative constructions to more formally structured housing. This process would occur by replacing current houses with new public residences, temporarily relocating the families who live there, and paying them a proper compensation based on property value. This approach offers a balance between top-down and bottom-up redevelopment, contrasting what was proposed by Haussmann. In order for this type of redevelopment to be persistent, it is necessary for other forms of public housing to be implemented as well. This can be seen in some of the states of the US, places where many locations are developed as public housing that can be rented at affordable rates with less privileged population. On the other hand, the maintenance of these locations is crucial. Given that what was observed in the period Igo in St. Louis by Le Corbusier and the fast deterioration of these residences in that location. Moreover, the redevelopment of these locations should maintain the productivity, amenity, and sociality previously embodied in the place. There are also aesthetic reasons for retaining the basic form of informal urbanism. The shantytown has been subject of aesthetic interest since the early 20th century for Le Corbusier and other architects, because of its strong vernacular aesthetic, also known as architecture without architects. This image shows an informal settlement next to a canal in Bangkok. The emergence of slum tourism has shown that urban informality can also be appreciated with nostalgic elements and the search for authenticity. This way, it can be concluded that the urban informality in Lagos is consequent to the overpopulation of the city, along with the government's lack of involvement in the provision of social services to the masses. Furthermore, the population of these settlements became self-sustaining in order to compensate for the services they couldn't access, creating large character and individuality in these locations. Urban informality solutions must be sensitive to the needs of the community. The community bond should be preserved. As Joseph Godlewski mentions in his text, the process of development should not create an oversimplified and formalist environment. Many authors bring forth positive aspects on urban informality, as it creates environments that flourish with community bonding and individual relations, highlighting the bottom-up perspective that Jane Jacobs mentions in her works. Also, it must be considered that, in an utopian world, there might be a solution to current urban informality issues, but in the world we currently live in, attempting to resolve the issues might not be an accomplishable achievement, given the limited resources available to these governments and the extent of this issue.